Welcome to Civilization Skylines, and this is the United Provinces of Terreggia. Hello, I'm Poplar Ponderosa, and today we're checking out my latest map for Cities Skylines II. The map is called Terreggia, a name you may recognize from the lore of Overcharged Egg. With the release of Civilization VII on the horizon, I wanted to do something to celebrate. This map is heavily inspired by the hexagonal style of maps in Civ 5, 6, and 7. You can see the landscape is broken up into hexes, and so are the map tiles. So, as you progress through the game, you unlock hexes and can play in a fashion similar to Civilization, expanding your city one tile at a time. And you can even play this with other builders by taking turns passing the saved file back and forth, building multiple cities on the same map. There are 3 starting areas on the map, each with 3 hexes and their own unique biome. Now, I know this map won't be for everyone, and I'll be the first to admit this isn't my most beautiful map. It is, after all, my first entirely handcrafted map. No height maps were used here. It's also not meant to look very realistic. The goal was to capture the feeling of Civilization and give players a new way to play Cities Skylines II. In my last overmap video for Homestock, I said that was my most ambitious map yet. I think I can now say that this is my most ambitious map yet. It has taken more time and planning than any other Cities Skylines 1 or 2 map that I have ever created. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, but it's definitely the most unique. Along with this map, I'm also publishing 2 blank map templates with hex tiles for all my mapmaker friends out there. More on that in the map tile chapter. Speaking of chapters, I've created the video chapters for your convenience, so please feel free to skip to the sections you find most interesting. First, I'll discuss the inspiration and concept for this map. Then I'll go over how I made the map in Civ 6 and Cities Skylines 2. Then I'll quickly summarize the map features, and most importantly, in my opinion, I'll explain how to play on this map with multiple players. And lastly, I'll briefly introduce an upcoming build series on this map. Alright, let's go back to the beginning, shall we? So where did this idea come from? Almost a couple of years ago now, Overcharged Egg posted a fictional fantasy-style map titled the United Provinces of Terreggia that contained all their city builds at the time. I believe the map was originally created by Rich from Egg's community. I thought this map was super cool as I'm a total map nerd. I was also really enjoying making maps in CS1 at the time and decided to start making a version of it. After a bit of progress, I checked with Egg and Rich to see if they were alright with me adapting their content. I received their blessing, but after a while handcrafting the landscape, I wasn't satisfied with how it looked and shelved the project for another day. I started working on some other projects, then CS2 came out, and I just kind of forgot about it. Then, sometime last year, while making Caribou Valley, I was working on the map tiles and put in an Easter egg showing the CS2 logo with trees, which I then put within a hexagonal tile. It made me wonder what it would be like to play on a map made entirely of hex tiles. This was sometime after Civ 7 had been announced, and that's when it dawned on me that you could mimic a Civilization-style map in CS2. And then it double dawned on me that I already had a concept for a fictional map, Terreggia. So I got to work. Altering map tiles is typically the last step of map making for me, because I have the landscape to work with at that stage. But I knew with this project, I would want to do the map tiles first. I started tinkering with map tiles in the editor. It was a tedious process at first to get all the tiles the exact same size, and honestly, I didn't know at the time if they would be a good size for the entire map or larger assets like train yards or airports. Then, one day, after the October 23rd, 2024 patch, I came back to the project to work on the map, but thanks to a bug in the update, the road tooltips no longer appeared in the editor. The tooltips show things like road length, slope, and angles from adjacent roads. These were crucial for getting the hexagons right. The tooltips are still visible in-game, just not in the editor. It's been a thorn in the side of many map makers who want to get road measurements right, or, more importantly, achieve reasonable slopes on highways and railways. At this time, I was pretty busy with Homestock, so I decided to shelve the project again, and wait for the tooltip bug to be fixed by the time I came back to it. Oh, how wrong I was. Months later, after Homestock was published, I returned to the Hex Tile project. The tooltip bug was still not fixed, but I decided to push on. Again, it was very tedious and challenging to try and get the hexes right. I tried to project the existing roads out from the center that I had already created, only to discover that they weren't perfect, and the roads weren't parallel. At the edges, they were just getting too close or too far away from each other. Basically, this map was useless. I needed a new approach. I had an idea, but first, I needed to learn how to make a map in Civilization VI. Because I wanted to mimic the look of Civilization, I needed reference images to make the map in CS2. So I decided to make the map using the Civ 6 world builder, which I had never done before but was totally excited by. This would also give me the benefit of having an image overlay to use in the map editor. Now, I'm a big fan of the Civ franchise. I started playing Civ 3 back in the day and have probably put the most time into Civ 5. I also really enjoyed Civ 6, and I'm really looking forward to Civ 7. Anyway, the world builder in Civ 6 is not available by default, so I actually needed to unlock it. If you want to do this yourself, I'll leave a link in the description for a resource on how to unlock the world builder. Once I was in the world builder, I used the Terreggia map as my reference and tried my best to recreate it on a small map. I chose a small map because the number of tiles was approximately how many I could fit on a CS2 map while keeping each tile a reasonable size. If I chose a large map, the map tiles would be tiny. As you can see, it's not a perfect representation of Terreggia, but I think it's close enough. I tried to match the different types of landscape and add forests, marshes, mountains, etc. I also added a few natural wonders, such as Everest, to match this highest peak, and the Great Barrier Reef near the Thessia archipelago, since Thessia is an Australian-themed build. Once I finished the map, I loaded up a new game on it, entered the Reveal All command into the console, and looked at the strategic view. This is what I would use in my image overlay in the editor. I also took a few screenshots of the map in its normal view for reference to try and mimic the landscape when terraforming. Note that I have a visual mod active in Civ 6 that makes it look more like Civ 5. Now that I had these reference images, I could go back to the CS2 editor. Once in the editor, I loaded up the overlay and centered it on the map. I decided to use roads as guides again. This would allow me to see the hexagons without the image overlay on. So, using alley roads, I drew long roads from one end of the map to the other. Once all the lines were drawn, I had to remove roads in the middle of the hexagons. The next step was to delete all the default square tiles and redraw the new hexagonal tiles. As I mentioned earlier, along with this map, I've published 2 blank maps with the hexagonal map tiles for other map makers. One version has roads. This is useful for creating fictional maps like I've just done, and the other version, without roads, is useful for importing height maps. So if you're a map maker and want to create a map with hexagonal tiles, check out the templates linked in the description. They should save you some time. Once I had done most of the terrain, I selected my start tiles. The game normally gives you 9 starting tiles. I decided to make 3 starting areas, each with 3 tiles. If you don't like these starting areas, you can change the starting tiles in 2 ways. The first option is in the editor. Once in the editor, load the map, select Map from the top left, then click on Select Starting Tiles from the panel on the right. Now you can right-click to deselect map tiles and left-click to deselect tiles. Please note that this procedure is very prone to crashes, so never deselect all starting tiles, always have at least one. And if you're editing the shapes of tiles, never delete a start tile, otherwise you're gonna have a bad time. Also, note that you will want to add outside connections to the tiles you select. This will include highways, high voltage lines, and combined water pipes. The other method is to use the 529 Tiles mod by Algernon to relock all tiles, then choose new ones in a new game. This won't require going in the editor, but you also won't be able to add the outside connections you might want unless you use Anarchy. The mod description says this shouldn't cause any issues or dependencies, but I haven't tested it, so your mileage may vary. The last thing I'd like to mention about map tiles is actually something I did at the very end of creating this map. Tygon reached out to me and asked if I've ever used water tiles. Now, I didn't even know these were a thing until he asked. So we did some testing and discovered that this is another type of map tile that behaves entirely the same as a regular map tile, except it is blue, and, more importantly, they have 1/3 the cost and upkeep as a regular tile. So I decided to use these along the coast of the map. It gives the map a cool look in the purchase map tile screen, and it looks similar to the coastal water tiles in a civilization map. But more importantly, they reduce the cost of buying coastal tiles just to build a harbor or build a bridge. This is the first time I'm aware of them being used in a published map, so hopefully it's fine. So far, I haven't run into any issues using them. I think this is something I'm going to be using in all my maps going forward. Please let me know if you have any experience with this. Okay, let's take a step back to when we had just a blank map with the hex roads for guides. I brought up the overlay and started by lowering the ocean tiles. Once the ocean was created, I started leveling out some plateaus to add some vertical interest to the landscape. I decided to keep the tiles mostly flat for ease of building. I created several lakes and a few marshy areas, as well as this lake that would become a desert oasis, marking the location of Ilos on the fantasy map. I also made some rivers from the lakes to the ocean, and I handcrafted hills and mountains to try and replicate the look of the terrain from my reference image. If you look at these two mountain ranges side by side, I think I got it pretty close. Sometimes I just made some of the mountains or hills up by myself instead of copying them entirely from the reference image. But I think it's important to remember here that the scale won't always feel right. If you put a skyscraper up next to some of these mountains, it'll look a bit off. But once you zoom out, you'll get that feeling that you're looking at a game like Civilization, which is what I was trying to capture. The coastline features steep cliffs, river deltas, and beaches. I even included the Great Barrier Reef by creating little underwater hills close to the surface of the water. I also tried to create dunes in the desert area, but when I covered it with a surface, it's almost invisible. I can just barely see it at dawn or dusk at the right angle, and you can also see it if you turn on contour lines. I decided to leave it in there because I find it very interesting. I wish that we had better surfaces for terrains in this game, but that's okay. Just a note that while you can build roads on this and you can also zone on it, but you can't plop anything on it like service buildings, so it's actually fairly limited what you can do here. That is, unless you use mods like Anarchy. All types of transportation are available on this map. Since it's an island map, I use tunnels to connect highways and rail. I generally tried to make the highways and railways look like they do in Civilization, with a little bit of realism as well. For highways, most of them are only 2-lane, 2-way, so they wouldn't be overbuilt. There are 3 simple interchanges on the map. This trumpet interchange has 4-lane highways, but still isn't totally overbuilt. I used the Grand Bridge to represent the amazing Harbour Bridge created by Teddy Radko for the Thessia series. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend checking it out. I'll put a link in the description. The Thessia series, by the way, is still one of my favorite CS1 builds, so hats off to Egg for that one. The rail is fairly simple throughout the map, with 3 outside connections and 1 intersection near the trumpet interchange. There are several seaways around the map, with 1 traveling under the Grand Bridge. There are 4 connections by air, 1 for each type of palm tree. I also considered the location of the 3 starting areas and their distance to each type of transportation. Each starting area has a 2-lane, 2-way highway going through it to start building from. Railways are 2 tiles away from each starting area, and seaways are 4 tiles away. Air can technically be connected from any tile, but note that the smallest airport requires 2 tiles to build. And good luck with the international airport. Once I finished the transportation networks, I moved on to landscaping and detailing. Keeping in theme with civilization maps, I tried to create several different biomes. Let's call this direction north. That matches the original fantasy map after all. Now I will admit, at this point I realized that I actually screwed up which direction is north, so I'm sorry about that, but there's no easy way to fix it. Unfortunately, the sun will rise in the south and set in the north. But hey, this is a fictional fantasy map, so whatever goes, right? The colder northern areas of the map are mostly spruces, with pines introducing themselves more as you travel south. Oaks and other deciduous trees also become more prevalent as you travel south into the more temperate regions, and around rivers. There are a few marshes that contain many bushes and flowers with some deciduous trees. The middle section of the map contains more tropical regions with palm trees. The desert also contains some palm trees and bushy areas where water would be more likely to collect. For a little extra detail, the Great Barrier Reef is covered in flower bushes. I had to use Anarchy to place these, but I think it's a nice touch. Each of the 3 starting areas has its own biome. One is in a coastal tropical rainforest area beside this mountain range. Another is on a river delta with marshes and deciduous forests. This is the location of Palaven and Friendwood on the fantasy map. And the third is in a northern boreal forest on a mountainside plateau nestled between 2 lakes. The detailing around the map is fairly simple. The trickiest part was definitely the desert. I had to be very careful in placing the surfaces so that they could be removed in vanilla. Sadly, this causes some other issues with vanilla gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, you can build roads, zone, and place trees, and extend industry areas over the surface, but you cannot place buildings like service buildings on top. If you want to build here, I highly recommend using Anarchy. Otherwise, like many dune seas, it's actually difficult to build there, so maybe this is kind of realistic? I also used the forest surface to create these smooth brown hills that we can see here in our reference image. I also used the sand surface for a few beaches. I really wish there was a snow surface, because I would have tried to create icebergs like you can see at the edges of the civilization maps. I also wanted to try and create tundra tiles with surfaces, but it didn't quite feel right, so I left it out. Otherwise, there are some rocks, boulders, and a few ruins around the map. Oh, and of course I named a bunch of stuff because I like Easter eggs. So I hope you have fun finding those. Now let's have a look at the resource distribution. Since we have hex tiles, I felt it appropriate to try and work with those. First up, we have forests, and we just talked about that. Forestry be where trees be. Fertile land is abundant on plains, plateaus, and floodplains. Ore can be found in hills and mountains. And oil is mostly in the desert, with some up in the tundra-like areas, similar to civilization. There's plenty of groundwater on the map as well. I tried to place it where I thought more groundwater would be present and made sure each starting area had access to some. As for starting areas, each starting area contains fertile land, has ore that is 1 tile away, and oil that is 3 or 4 tiles away. Each starting area has outside connections for electricity, water, and sewage. This should give more flexibility for building multiple cities and multiplayer builds. And there we go, the map is finished. So, time for a map feature summary. The default map theme is North American, but you can change that. The climate ranges from 11 to 27 degrees Celsius. In freedom units, that's warm, so it'll never snow. The buildable area is a comfortable 32%. There are outside connections by road, rail, sea, air, as well as electricity, water, and sewage. For natural resources, you can see the amounts here if that's the kind of thing you care about. No mods are required to play this map. It's vanilla friendly, unless you want to place buildings in the desert, as I mentioned earlier, then anarchy will be required. And very shortly, I'll be going into a few recommended settings for multiplayer builds. As I mentioned before, the map is currently set up with 3 starting areas, each with 3 starting tiles. So it's ideal for 3 players, but there's nothing wrong with playing this one on your own. If you want to play this with friends, you can make your own rules, but I would recommend the following. Keep the map tiles locked. I think this is essential for the purpose of the map. Play with unlimited money. There is only 1 budget, so trying to make that work with 3 cities is just a mess. Someone could bankrupt the build on 1 turn and screw the whole thing up for everyone. And unlocking tiles just gets more expensive. Play with all assets unlocked. It could be fun to play through the milestones together, but I think this will help encourage different build styles and looks of cities. But this is up to the group of builders. Play with the region packs in your playset. This can really make each player's city look different from the others. Make sure you're using the same assets and mods that change anything in the simulation. Each player can use whatever visual mods they want. Don't build in anyone else's tiles or remove anything they built. And lastly, use districts to restrict your city services to your city, unless you want to share. That would be cool too. Let me know if you think I've missed anything that should be a rule in here. Now this is how a multiplayer game could work on this map. While players can't play on a single map at the same time, save files can be passed around, either as local files or published to PDX mods. This is how typical collab projects work. Round 1 would start with the first builder taking the first turn and building in their starting area. They will then send it to the next builder for turn 2, who will do the same, and pass it on to the third builder, and so on. Once everyone has finished their first turn, the first round is complete. They will then pass it back to the first builder, who will start round 2, which is where they can start unlocking tiles. I think that each turn someone should unlock 3 tiles. This sounds like a reasonable area for 1 build session. So they would build on their tiles, and then send it to the next person for the next turn, and so on, just like round 1. Then it'll go to round 3, round 4, and so on. The build can go through several rounds before running out of tiles to build on. Now there's something I want to address that I've heard before. You can technically do this on any map, but I feel that the tile configuration and the theme of the map work really well for this mode of play. If you want to play with 2 or 4 or more people, you can change the starting tiles as I detailed in the map tiles section earlier. Now that the map is published, I have something exciting to announce. I will be starting a new collaborative build series using this map. It will be a 3-player build following the rules from the previous section, and I've got a few ideas to spice it up even more. So far there's some interest from other creators, but there's a chance that the community can get involved too. I want this to be a fun, low-pressure, collaborative series with no hard deadlines, so if you're interested, keep an eye out for that first episode of the new series. I have been dreaming of making this project a reality for over a year, and I'm so happy to finally get it out there. I'm glad I didn't make it in CS1, because the map tiles really take it to the next level, and combining it with one of my favorite game franchises was really fun. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but I hope some people get some enjoyment out of it, and find a new way to play the game. If you would like to give the map a try, you can find it linked in the description below. And will you be playing Civ 7? Because I will. Also keep an eye out for episode 1 of the collaborative build series if you're interested. As for future maps, I'm really looking forward to getting back to realistic maps. I'm currently working on a West Coast USA map to hopefully publish around the time of the Southwest USA region pack. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time. Take care and happy building.